Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. So let's first take a look at the headlines. A state of emergency has been declared in LA as wildfires spread to nearly 3,000 acres. Over 30,000 residents have so far been evacuated, with winds causing the fire to rip through the county. Incoming US President Donald Trump has refused to rule out using military or economic action to pursue the acquisition of the Panama Canal and Greenland. He also promises to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Trump has also stated that all hell will break out in the Middle East if Israeli hostages are not released by his inauguration. Meanwhile, US military aid allocated to Egypt is being shifted to Lebanon. Russian troops have captured the front-line town of Kurakov in the Donetsk region, with recent reports suggesting the town of Shevchenko has also been taken, though Ukraine say fighting is still ongoing. These latest captures bring Russia closer to the key logistical hub of Pokrovsk. Meta Platforms have announced a major shift in its approach to political content on Facebook, Instagram and Threads. The company has scrapped its US fact-checking program and reduced restrictions on topics like immigration and gender identity. CEO Mark Zuckerberg says the changes reflect a desire to prioritise freedom of expression and address criticism from conservatives ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's second term. Meta also plans to replace fact-checking with a community notes system similar to the one seen on X, and will stop proactively scanning for hate speech, focusing instead on high-severity violations. The company has also made moves to strengthen ties with the incoming administration, elevating Republican policy executive Joel Kaplan and UFC CEO Dana White to key positions. Meta's shift comes as the company faces backlash over censorship and bias, sparking changes in its content moderation practices. Let's listen in to what Mark Zuckerberg has said.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US.
We'll now speak to our correspondent Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, I would like to really look at this shift coming from Meta, coming from Mark Zuckerberg. It's a change that we've seen already on X in terms of censorship, but what could this mean for Meta and their several platforms moving forward?
Well, Josh, you see, this is the Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg has, followed the steps of Elon Musk, the earlier, because they were also removed this concept of fact checkers from their social media platforms, and now they have reduced with community. They have reduced it with the community notes. A similar thing. Let's put this into perspective. Similar thing happened in India as well. When the government of India planned to make a fact-checking unit, that was a partial censorship which it tried to create. Like all the content that will go on social media will be checked by as per the government. When they had formed this fact-checking unit, they said that all the content going to the social media will be checked by the fact-checking unit, which was later the Supreme Court of India had reversed that decision. So this is a similar thing that Mark Zuckerberg has done, removing the concept of fact checkers from Facebook and replacing it with content notes, just to reduce the censorship, so that no one could restrict the free flow of news on the social media platform. Yes, George, back to you in the studio.
We're now joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne, an international affairs expert, live from Singapore. Rohan, we have seen relationships between Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg be strained in the past. Donald Trump, of course, was banned from Facebook for a certain time. But this move that we're now seeing, do you think this has got big implications, not just for the social media platforms, but for popular culture and the impact that social media has on America moving forward? While we fix the issues that we're having there with Rohan, we'll now move to Manan Dwiveda, a foreign affairs expert. I'll ask you the same question, Manan. We have seen a fractured relationship between Zuckerberg and Donald Trump in the past, but are we now moving towards a world in which the impact that social media has on politics and also the people of America being more vital? And what will the impact be of this lack of censorship that we might see moving forward?
I particularly believe that there has to be a freedom of expression involved in the manner in which people utilize the social media. And there are certain, because there are certain national security concerns which are involved here. Some sort of an information can be very tricky, can be very sensitive. For example, I can cite out an incident in 2008 when Mumbai was attacked by Pakistani terrorists, Asmal Kajab and the group, Kasab and the group. At that particular point of time, because of the complete free flow of media, information bytes, both sound and audio, video bytes, the Pakistani insurgents who were masterminding the plot in Mumbai at that particular instant, they were able to give directions via the television, or they were able to know what their cohorts, that is the terror mongers who were active in Mumbai, in the Taj Palace Hotel, how far they are succeeding and how far they are processing. That kind of a thing. And in the present context, if we look at it, we are going to find that there are both pros and cons of what is happening in WhatsApp, what is happening in Facebook, and what is happening in Instagram. For example, a person might be very much moved or perturbed or might be very sentimentally moved by an international development. So he might come out with an emotive first retort, an emotive first reaction. But that might be hurting the sensibilities of the people on the other side of the fence. So I particularly feel that a lot of, in Asia, if we talk about Asia, specifically India, then we have to look into these norms. We have to look into the legislation, which should be put in place if a balance has to be reached. As far as meta checking is concerned, now I personally feel that people might not be so responsible because they said that community notes and corrections and additions and deletions by the Facebook posters will be the panacea for this quibble. But I particularly feel that there needs to be a balanced approach. And if we go back in history, on 25th of September in 1789, this issue first cropped up, where to the American Constitution, 1 to 10 amendments were passed, wherein it was, but it all happened in the context of national security. And if we, as very nicely, the anchor has talked about popular culture. If we talk about the Iraq war, where America intervened, or the Vietnam war, where the Americans intervened, or if we talk about the Spanish-US war in 1898, where Americans and Spanish people fought, William Randolph Hearst gave just a 3-worded clarion call. He said that my reporters, you give me the pictures, I'll give you the war. The same kind of legerdemain occurred in Vietnam, where the My Lai massacre and the Buddhist monks being set on fire, they became part of an international and global imagery and a kind of a simulacra. So I think there are both the sides attached to it, because sometimes radicalization has also come up as a major issue. For example, we look at how Arab Spring came into being. For instance, people started chatting with each other from Tunisia. A cloth merchant who had nothing to do with politics started it all in Tunisia. And apart from that, if we look at the Iraq war, then multiple and myriad reflections were being displayed by the American media or by the global media, wherein people did not know what to lap up as part of their daily routine of news and what to reject. So I definitively think that a large iota of regulation and screening by the government of the country or some kind of a global authority or a regulatory body is required if If tranquility, sobriety, decency, and national security concerns are to be met very effectively. Going back to Zuckerberg and the American scenario, I personally feel that Zuckerberg and the rest of them want to improve their relationship with the Republicans or with the conservatives, as President Donald Trump will be proudly anointed as the head of the state for America on 20th of January 2025. So I think it might have to do with commercial aspects too, and a kind of a political one-upmanship or some sort of a political correctness which is being attempted by Mark Zuckerberg. But we have to have full faith in what President Donald Trump will do. Because when it comes to insurgency, when it comes to terrorism, when it comes to radicalization, then there needs to be a gatekeeper on the social media which can erase, delete, and which can keep a tab on what is being said and what is not being said or how it is being said. That would be my perspective.
Yes, I want to pick up on that. Thank you, Manan. I'm going to go to Professor Rohan Gunaratne, who we now have with us. Looking at the potential extremism that we're seeing on social media, we're seeing explicit content now on X with the lack of moderation. Is this something that you think we might see on Meta and their platforms? And what do you think the impact could be moving forward, especially in the wake of the recent New Orleans attack? Do you think that these social media platforms may become a hotbed for radicalization or potentially extremism? And what can these platforms do to prohibit that?
The main medium used by the extremists and the terrorists to drive radicalization that leads to attacks, that inspires and instigates attacks, is social media. 80 to 90% of all the extremist websites, blog sites, and other platforms are hosted on US and European servers. It is because of the freedom of expression and other matters to do with their legal frameworks. So what is so important today is to ensure that social media companies take responsibility. We should also have laws, a legal and a policy framework where governments will be able to investigate and prosecute executives of these tech companies if they do not remove extremist material, because it is this extremist material that causes radicalization and develops support for terrorism and also to perpetrate terrorist attacks. So it is a national and an international security imperative that governments work together to ensure that social media is not misused and abused to advance the goals of these terrorist and extremist groups.
Okay, we'll now go to Thomas Porteous, our anchor and correspondent, who joins us in the newsroom. I'd like to go back in to the impacts of social media and what we might see, Thomas. Looking at the way that X has changed since Elon Musk has come into power, do you think we're going to see something similar with Meta and their platforms? And how do you think that could impact the country of the United States moving forward?
Now, whether we like it or not, social media is a huge part of our lives. Meta has over 4 billion eyeballs across their platforms. We have seen that Mark Zuckerberg has branded this as an X-like change, which means these fact checkers will be removed, which also means that disinformation, like on X, will be sparse. We will have to see how this is monitored moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. We'll now move on, and President-elect Donald Trump has issued a stern warning that all hell will break out in the Middle East if Hamas does not release hostages by the time he takes office on January the 20th. Trump's statement comes as negotiations in Doha and Qatar continue, with a US envoy, Steve Witkoff included, saying that progress is being made. Hamas is demanding that Israel end military operations against Gaza as part of any deal to release the hostages. Nearly 100 hostages remain captive in Gaza, with some feared dead. Trump's warning is clear, though he did not specify what action he would take. We're joined again by our correspondent Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, we've heard these words from Donald Trump before, but this is again an emphasis from him that he is going to take strong action. Now, what do you think that action might be, and do you think this is going to push us closer to a ceasefire deal involving hostages that are being held by Hamas?
Well, there is nothing new about Donald Trump, threatening that if Israeli hostages are not released, then strict action will be taken. We have earlier also seen that Donald Trump has made such statements regarding this. This could also, this could also prompt this Hamas group to release the Israeli hostages that are still in captivity, and some of them have also died. Recently, what had happened that Hamas had also released a list of 34 Israeli hostages that it might release. So, as far as if we talk about an action, if for instance, like in a case scenario, if the hostages are not released by the time Donald Trump takes over as the president of the United States, he might go on to take some military action, or he might, fund the Israeli Defense Forces to carry out major attacks on the Hamas hideouts in Gaza. Which the Israeli Defense Forces have been actually carrying out attacks in Gaza on Hamas. And recently what we saw is that they also took the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital as on the suspicion that he was working as a Hamas operative. So it is a very complex situation that needs to be monitored, Josh. But it is certain that Donald Trump will take action regarding this if all the hostages are not timely released by this militant group Hamas. Yes, Josh, back to you in the studio.
We're joined by Wael Awad, a West Asia strategist. Looking at the potential impact of Donald Trump in bringing us closer to a ceasefire within the Middle East, specifically involving Israel and Hamas in Gaza, do you think that his words have any validity? He's spoken openly about wanting to end all conflicts, but do you think this re-establishment that he's made in terms of the strong language he's used surrounding Hamas and their hostage release, do you think this holds more weight than some of his previous statements, potentially back from his first term as president as well?
Well, I think he is trying to prove that he is very close to Israel, and he's the most faithful president of the United States who will only serve Israel interests. So we do not see much of changes. In fact, it will be more of assertive of his own policy toward Palestinians. Remember, it was Trump who shifted the capitals to Jerusalem, shifted the American embassy, or trying to shift the American embassy to Jerusalem, where he recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, and also he gifted the occupied Syrian Golan to Israel by recognizing it as Israeli territories. So now with his second term, definitely after he got the support of the Jewish lobby in the United States and won the election, it's clear indication that he is interested in making sure that Israel's dominance in the region remain, and all the hostages are released without any conditions from Hamas. It is only released on the request or in dictation of what Israel wants. And for this reason, it is the first time in the history of the United States we see that the president who has not taken the helm of power in the state is yet sending a special envoy, Witkoff, into the negotiation in Doha. It's also an indication that he wanted to know if this, where this discussion is taking place, where it is moving forward, and whether a deal should be reached and must be reached by applying maximum pressure on the representative of Hamas. Because Israel till now, the chief negotiator of Israel is yet to leave Tel Aviv, because he is saying that with what we get from the Israeli sources, that he is not going to move unless and until the conditions of Israelis are met with the approval of Hamas negotiator. So I think there is going to be more chaotic situation, and the Palestinian will pay the hefty price, whether it was under Biden or is under Trump.
Yes, and Manan Dwivedi, our foreign affairs expert, looking at the people in Gaza, this threat towards Hamas could have implications to them, and we've seen the impact of Israeli military action within Gaza targeting Hamas, where tens of thousands have been killed. Do you think this is bad news either way for the people of Gaza? And given the destruction that we've already seen, what could potential US action in the region, direct US action in the region, mean for the people who have been displaced?
Well, actually, I personally feel that the outgoing President Joe Biden, he had talked about this idea, this policy dictum of a proportionate response. When the hostilities through drones and missiles, when they broke out between Jerusalem and Tehran, then at that particular point of time, like what the Americans have been telling Zelensky in their combat or in their action against the Russian invaders. So in a similar manner, the Americans, the White House has been telling Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and the rest of the hardliners and conservatives in the ruling dispensation in Israel that one should not escalate. So a kind of a reprimand was issued by President Joe Biden, as we all have seen it if we have been following the Hamas-Israel quagmire since the last year. So I personally feel one of the issues that should be brought out in the open. I'm not a votary for any of the political sections, but what we should know, there is this terminology called as the collateral damage. And what we need to know here, realize that what the terror mongers, the insurgents of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, what they do is that they hide their weapons, their equipment, their missiles, and their drones in civilian buildings, which happen to be schools and hospitals. So now, if you talk about the IDF action against Hamas, then some of the missiles, then actually civilians also get maimed and civilians also get killed, because the weaponry and even the terrorists are hiding with the people. And so, that kind of a thing, it's a shield technique where the terrorists utilize the commoners, the plebeians and the civilians, and when they get killed in the side shooting in the war or side bombing in the war, then the blame falls on Israel or it falls on United States of America. So I personally feel America can play a very constructive role, a very conducive role as far as peace building and peace making in the conflict is concerned. And I think because of the kind of leverage which America employs on the Jewish lobby, and the Jewish lobby enjoys it in the American political and business world. So they can come together, but I think Hezbollah and Israel Detan has been a kind of an achievement by the Americans, where the American government has been able to silence the conflict, at least temporarily there. And so that way something should be done about the Hamas and the Israel conflict too. But I personally feel that until and unless the remaining 100-odd hostages are not released by the Hamas's insurgents, then I think real peace cannot follow ensue, because I personally feel that Benjamin Netanyahu has his own clientele to satisfy as far as the Israeli audience is concerned.
Yes, Manan, thank you. We are joined now by Yeshaya Rosenman, an Israel journalist, live from Tel Aviv. I want to bring it back to the hostages. This is what Donald Trump is talking about. This is where the threats have come from. And looking at the protests we've had in Israel, but also the sadness and the despair that was caused following the October 7th attacks, how important is it for the Israeli people and the Israeli military that these hostages, dead or alive, are returned before a ceasefire can be struck?
Good afternoon. It's very important for the Israeli public, but I would dwell on the words you said, dead or alive. It is very important that they return alive. Dead, we have to make sure they don't return dead. Anything that would incentivize returning them dead, or disincentivize returning them alive, is highly problematic. So while, again, according in Jewish tradition, there is value to bringing them to a Jewish burial, etc., but the objective is returning the hostages alive. Now, there are large campaigns, as you said, there is a dispute that goes down the middle of the Israeli politics. The closer you are to the ideological left or even the radical left, you will say that the hostages take precedence over the war efforts. And the radical activists will blame Netanyahu for political motivations, for not releasing the hostages till now, his own, to save his own skin, etc. People in the right-wing camp, the more you are towards the towards the ideological right, you will say that the war efforts take precedence, because even if there are 100 hostages, some of which unfortunately are dead, but even if, let's say, half of them are alive, and you want to save 50 people, the outcome of the overall war is, of course, more important, because the entire country is dependent on the day after, on the outcome of the entire war. So it's a very important debate, and it's a debate that's going on. And the question is, can a deal actually be reached with Hamas? Because the hostages are the only negotiating card Hamas has left. Once they release all the hostages, there's nothing stopping from Israel from going into the last refugee camps in the center of Gaza, cleaning them out, and toppling Hamas completely. So it's the last human shield they have. So it's a question how to circle this square.
Yeshaya, thank you very much for joining us. That is all we have time for. We'll continue discussing the developments in America and also in the Middle East. We'll also be back with more of your latest international news updates from across the world.